Let's discuss hard aspects between Saturn and Venus in the natal horoscope. If you're new here, we're looking at things from an esoteric astrological perspective, which is different from traditional or personality-based astrology insofar as we're looking at the life of the soul and at what point of development that the soul is at, the overcoming of certain karmic problems, with this underpinning quality of reorientation towards selfless service, and how that actually expands the consciousness. So there's a sort of dualism that becomes apparent when we start looking at esoteric astrology between the destiny of the exoteric or personality-based horoscope and the soul-based horoscope. So today I want to look at what the implications are for hard aspects between Saturn and Venus in the horoscope, and we'll look at some psychological motifs and some solutions from that angle, as well as what the potential alchemical transformation of this is going to look like esoterically. Okay, so let's just have a bit of a recap on what the significations of these planets are and how they differ from traditional to esoteric astrology. So Saturn is Satan, bondage, restrictions, crystallization of mental, of the thought forms. And that's where we get the bondage aspect, or how Satan is the bondage to materiality. So this is the lesser aspect of Capricorn, the dualism of Capricorn. And the other aspect is the higher turn of Saturn, which is striving, attainment of the spiritual goal. And we had Jesus Christ born during the December period, Capricorn period, which is where the initiate comes into being. So the mountain, climbing the mountaintop. So wherever Saturn is in the chart is going to bring limitations, restrictions, and very heavy and dense crystallizations of those limitations. Esoterically, we're really looking at going into and through and breaking open those limitations. But this is where we get the thing of Saturn aspects, or difficult, challenging things to do with Saturn take often time and age and maturation. And that is because you have to be working within those, the lower three worlds, so to speak, of materiality, and you have to continue hitting up against it, time and time again. It's not just a natural expansive movement, it's the opposites, that's the contraction. So Saturn is the planet of occult discipleship, however. So he demands that all debts must be paid. So wherever it's going to show up in the chart, there's a great opportunity for transformation, of lessons learned. And the important thing I want you to take away from this is that you can overcome Saturnian limitations, but it requires your spiritual development to do so. The expansion of your consciousness, the right use of the judicial mind, and of right seeing, right comprehension of the law. That's what karma is. The law of love, divine law. So wherever Saturn is in the chart, and whatever it's the house it's in, the sign that it's in, and whatever it's touching in negative aspect, those are the lessons of that when you can overcome them and really sit with them and stay consistent with them, will bring about the birth of a spiritual mastery. So that is the latent promise in Saturn aspects. And so coming back to Saturn and Venus, we have the problem of the law of love. This is very much the Libran problem, and I will link the Libra video, which is a very interesting sign esoterically, because Libra has to do with the balancing of the opposites, the male and female problem. Its association with connection and relationship is the most basic expression of this, the Venusian quality, as Venus, which is a fifth ray planet of concrete knowledge and science, and harmonizes the opposites at the highest level upon the mental plane, that being the soul self and the personality self. Spirituality, or spirit with matter, bringing together these opposites. As she comes down onto the astral plane in terms of the exoteric personality, form-based life, she is the expression of that bringing together of the opposites, insofar as it is desire, and through the sacral center, and yearning and love and lust. So the love and lust problem with hard aspects, with the hard aspect here between Saturn and Venus, is going to be a big motif. There's also the Taurian problem too. So some of the exoteric challenges with these aspects are going to be limitations around feminine enjoyment. We spoke a little bit about that in the last video on money and the seventh ray and Uranus. and sensuality, that there can be the need to expand the five senses and look at where there's a certain crystallization. There could be a negative idea that doing anything that could indulge the five senses and be part of a self-care ritual, that's superficial or shallow or not important. That could be one real obvious limiting, harsh aspect, coldness towards Venusian themes. So that could be the Taurian angle of it. The Libran angle is this relational problem, and it's a problem of desire. Now, this brings us into the broader discussion on Libra, which is the problem of the desire for love. The best expression of Libra exoterically is going to be this thing of psychic balancing, and we can see 7th house placements and Libran placements a lot in psychotherapists, psychologists, where there is this interplay, yes, with the one person and the other therapist and the client, but in sort of working out those psychological problems, it brings the psyche into wholeness and balance. So I talk a lot about Jungian psychology on this channel. So in those words, we would be looking at the anima problem and the animus problem. And this comes to plague people with difficult Venus aspects, 7th house aspects, hard aspects between Saturn and Venus, where there is the working out of these projections through the sphere of relationship, where there's a real need to bring that mirror image to go, what am I meant to be learning here? Why am I attracted to this kind of person? Why do I keep repeating this pattern in relationship time and time and time again? If you're a woman, you go, okay, this is something about my own animus problem, and that might lead back into the father complex, because while they are different archetypally, the father does imbue the early imprints of the internal masculine, so you have to kind of detangle them and work out how that's being perpetuated or worked out in relationship. Unfortunately, a lot of people with hard aspects between Saturn and Venus who remain in the exoteric confines where there isn't a spiritual evolution happening will often find that they continue to fail in relationships, or they've decided to just go it alone. And that can be a really sad thing, because there is a yearning for wholeness and for unity. However, the spiritual invitation is to ask, what am I actually longing for? The lower aspect of Libra is the lust, the desire piece, the desire for the conjunctio. That's the lesser, immature aspect of Aphrodite, who is often the Venusian goddess, right? Where she loves the sexuality, the coming together, but then there's a sort of waning away, and there's all these different relationships or whatever. But spiritually, we come to ask, what actually is, am I actually choosing love in this situation, or am I going blindly with my libido and my attraction? Because most of what our libido does, what we are attracted to, is just the echo of past patterns. And this also brings us into that dimension of what is eros, what is libido? Because we just say, oh, that's just what I'm attracted to. But what actually makes one have a certain taste or preference? Eros, which we also talked about in the last video, and interesting that this is a Uranian conversation, because Uranus is the 7th ray and rules the sacral center. And it is the esoteric ruler of Libra. So it's spirit and matter coming together. That's the higher turn of the sexuality, right? So it starts bringing all of these pieces together. But this Libran problem will take us into this question of what is it that we truly desire. And the highest turn, again, the psychological quality of Libra in its more evolved exoteric way. So still exoteric, but oriented towards the evolutionary impulse, is coming to the awareness of what self-love is. People with Saturn, Venus hard aspects can often be a self-love problem, whether one has an inner persecutor or the coldness that I gave an example of before, like you don't deserve this in love, or you don't deserve the Taurian indulgences. So we can have the inner persecutor, and perhaps we then play that out in relationship, or we might even become the persecutor and identify with the persecutor and then play that out as the aggressor in relationship, or project it onto a person who might actually not be treating us that way at all, but then we come up against that in the relationship anyway, because there's this demand to own the mirrored image of the projection. So working out what's yours versus what's concrete in the reality can be difficult. And sometimes it's both, where you pick an abusive partner, but that inner persecuting dynamic is already existing within oneself. So this Libran theme again of the concretization, the crystallization of materiality. Libra is the balancing of the opposites, and the highest pairing of opposites is the matter and spirit. And so when you are not conscious of the law of love, the divine aspect of deity and of being as the love principle, as true love, not lower desire and what I want, selfish love, which is really kind of a Martian solar plexus-y desire, but true love, when there is an absence of that revelation, then you have matter and materiality outweigh the spiritual values. And we see this, apparently Libra is the most common zodiac sign for the billionaires in the world. You'd think Capricorn, but Libra. And that is because of this reason, where it's almost starts to look a little bit like the lesser aspect of Scorpio, where you've got like sort of being lost in the astral plane or lost in the Maya of reality, the lower three realms only. So that materiality can actually make itself known in Libra. And so if we don't have that recognition of what the law of love is, then it's hard to make the decisions from that place of judicial mental balancing. That's why Saturn is exalted in Libra. That's the supermind, seeing things clearly. Remember, the keynote for Libra is I choose the way that leads between the two great lines of force. So rather than the push and the pull, and this is where the desire and the lust happens, it becomes more of this contemplation. This is where we get the psychological component of Libra. What am I trying to figure out here? Why am I picking this thing over and over again? What am I seeing in this other person that maybe I might be disowning in myself? That can be a very seventh housey sort of question there. So it's all of these sorts of things that happen, and we become conscious of what the truth is. Truth is a higher aspect of Venus too. She's the fifth ray planet again and rules the Ajna center, which is right perception. Partly why Venus is in detriment in Scorpio, because she can't perceive things clearly in the Maya. She's lost to the spiritual aspect. So, and we see a Venus being quite prominent in the charts of many scientists for this reason. It's that higher turn of the sensuality of the five senses becoming more like, what is this? What is this? Versus the, oh, I'm in the senses, I'm in the senses. So it's the same thing. We see it both in Taurus and in Libra. They're very much about knowledge and truth, these signs, as part of their growth. What is the nature of this material substance, Taurus, and the sciencey element there? What is the nature of this relationship? Why am I playing out this dynamic in relationship? And this ebb and flow and starting to weigh the opposites here. And then eventually becoming single-eyed, as Christ said in the Bible. If thine eye be single, thy body shall be full of light. So we need to become conscious of what love is. If we have a Saturn square Venus in the natal chart, maybe there wasn't a whole lot of love growing up, or not a natural reciprocity, give and take. These are Libran themes again. And the prostitution problem is encapsulated in Libra, where when you don't have love, then there's the exchange, contract, also known, connected to the seventh house in Libra, contracts, things that bring together. But in the prostitution case, you've got, here's money, and now I get sex. So it's the lesser aspect of the interplay of the male-female opposites when it's not based on love. When it is based on love, here you get the religious motif of like the holy marriage or the blessed marriage, where the sexuality is a part of that, but it's merged with the love principle. So we have dedication, commitment, patience, all of the virtues of love. And if you see or have been blessed to be in a successful marriage, or know people who have long-term successful marriages, the dedication to the love principle and the commitment to the love principle becomes more important than the personal desires. We don't like to hear that a lot in our current world because we have this confusion about what sacrifice is, and compromise and martyrdom. And wrong reciprocity will lead to bad sacrifice, which is really martyrdom. Right understanding of love will lead to the right notion of sacrifice, which is the giving up of lower aspects of selfishness in the name of building and increasing the integrity of right relations. And in a truly loving relationship, that will be participated in by both people. Okay, so, and this is where we grow in the marriage. This is why the right law of human relationships, again, a Libran theme, of balancing the energies together. And what do the male and female principles look like when we're being driven by the law of love? How are they brought into a higher kind of expression versus the lowest potential, where it's exploitation, or it's contractual only, it's that sort of give and take. And that's the limits around relationship that are based on the bondage to materiality and not the law of love. So again, the theme of the law of love and having to become conscious of what love is really. And in that, you have to evaluate, what did I learn from my parents? What was the relationship dynamic there? What kind of people am I attracted to? What am I looking for? How am I blinded? What do I see in the person? And then it ends up that they're not that. And what is this revealing to be about my own internal dynamic within myself? These questions have to be asked and worked out. And this is where we will get paid the dividends from Saturn, who can bring spiritual attainment. That is the higher aspect of Capricorn, which it rules both exoterically and esoterically. And interestingly, Venus is the hierarchical ruler of Capricorn. It's like there's something about the perfection of divinity within the form there, and the attainment of that spiritual goal. So just a little nod to that there. I've got a loose square between Saturn and Venus in my own chart. It's a slightly wider orb, but it's been a very strong theme in my life, and being Gemini rising, having Venus in Gemini, and the Libran theme being really brought into being. It's very much the animus problem has been a big thing in my life, the negative father problem. And that still plagues me now, but not within my marriage, because that I worked out what the law was, and I had the spiritual awakening, awoke to the divine love principle. Boom, then met my husband. But that had to happen first before I could bring in a relationship that reflected the integrity of the law. So that had to happen, and I went through a lot of catharsis and difficulty to get there. So that's one example. But we're going to see some angle of this problem in whatever hard aspect we have between these two planets. And we can surrender to limitations and choose to become solitary people, or blah, 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 blah. Or we can try and become conscious of the spiritual essence here. So the solutions are everything that we've just talked about. Also psychologically bringing in some of the Taurian themes. So practice of feminine enjoyment can be really important for bringing psychic balance here. And that's still a Libran thing there, even though we're talking about Taurian sensuality, because we're then talking about the interplay of, let's say, the masculine and the feminine principles. So, if you're getting into some of the Tantra stuff here, which is very seventh ray and Uranian, Uranus, esoteric ruler of Libra again, where, okay, the masculine loves and contains and provides, and then the feminine flourishes and enjoys and becomes like nature and the sensuality and the enjoyment of the senses. So self-care rituals and practices can be very helpful to help expand out of those limitations, Saturn. So you want to catch in what way does Saturn show up as an internal limitation, to do with feminine enjoyment, to do with expansion into eros in that way. And I'm not talking about flinging sexuality places. Usually that happens, that scattering of the sexual energy happens as a consequence of there not being nowhere else for that energy to go. So you need to make space. That's an organizing mental principle, and Saturn is a third ray planet of mind. You have to organize your thoughts accordingly. And where is this disorganized thinking interfering with the pleasure principle in a way that's creating a neurosis or a contraction, or interfering with the love principle in terms of, at some level, I believe I only deserve this from love, or I only think love can work within certain contractual agreements, etc., etc., etc. So to really get down into the depths with these aspects, hard aspects between Saturn and Venus, you have to, writing can help. What happens when I try and get myself into a receptive mode, whether it's receiving pleasure or receiving love? Where is there a negative anima or animus problem coming in and creating these dramas time and time again, not just in relationships where it may be being played out, But internally, what is that dynamic? And having to square in, hone in on where does that show up in the psyche, in the moment when how do I cap my decision making? How do I cap my own enjoyment and flow? So those are some psychological dimensions that are going to help round out some of these problems. But just keep in mind that spiritually, esoterically, this is a really great gift, having a hard aspect here, even though exoterically it is very challenging. And it can really limit romantic. Actually, that reminds me, let's read what Alan Oakham wrote about Saturn, Venus here. This is really quite something. The third and fifth rays, that's Saturn and Venus, combine to allow the light of mind to dominate the personal life. This is not the best combination if one is very romantically inclined, as it does not allow romanticism to proceed unless the love nature is following the law. So the power in that statement is in the implication that once you discover the right law and make the right decisions, and that's the Libran thing, judicial mind, then you will reap the rewards of that. So you can break out of the challenges of this placement. And the overall outcome will be a great understanding of the law of right human relationships, which has been a big theme of my life. And it would have been anyway, being a Gemini rising, and then Libra being a really big part of the Gemini to Libra interplay as the intermediary signs of development for each of those signs. So relationship was a sphere that I struggled in majorly for a long time. And now it is a great source of blessing in terms of my marriage. Although I still have the internal problem that is still being worked out between the contrasexual forces. So it's much more of an internal problem, but that's much better because it's closer to here, right? And it's about psychic wholeness rather than playing out the dramas in relationship. So there's a great potential here for the right comprehension of the law of human relationships, and it can bring a great deal of spiritual insight, understanding, and rewards in the sphere of love and relationship. There is a great beauty to these difficult placements, but it just requires us to start asking the right questions and start orienting ourselves towards the spiritual values, and to really make that time for all the things that we just spoke about, the self-care and right valuing of the self and making space, but also to understand what is it that we're truly looking for and what is love really. It really requires a deep contemplation to understand what love is in its highest turn of the spiral. It's much more than just the attraction of desire, and in fact this is often a glamour and a distortion of unity. So the law of love is the great potential for these difficult placements between Saturn and Venus.